Welcome to the Civic Brief with Dr. Isaiah Ike Wilson III, where complex issues meet everyday lives. Now, let's begin.
Fellow travelers, welcome back to the Civic Brief and to our second of 4 episodes for this month's focus on compound insecurity, and this walkabout covering what I like to call a requirement to think and, frankly, to prepare oneself to do beyond all boundaries and borders. We had our first episode with our guest conversationalists, the 3 ambassadors, during episode 1, Ambassadors Rannenberger, Blackwell, and Butler. This follow-on episode is intimate like the solo sessions always are. It's just you and me. And this will give me an opportunity to begin to expand and, frankly, kind of begin to untangle some of the complexities, that Gordian knot of compound, complex, and wicked problem dilemmas that the 4 of us in the guest spot tried to give a fuller context to this, what lies at the root of this relatively new phenomenon that I call compound security, and really what we as citizens of nations, of our nation here in the United States and of the world, really need to care about in the most practical of ways, most importantly, and that's the compound insecurity that this brings, not just geopolitically, but all the way down to our individual and household levels, in our home fronts, right on our kitchen tables, right at the gas pumps, et cetera, et cetera. So again, this shorter solo spot will give me first chance. We'll have episode 3 and 4 to follow. This will give us a chance for me to kind of untangle this and into spotlight, frankly, on some of the things that we talked about. In this solo session, I want to talk mainly about the Transatlantic alliance and this relationship between the United States, both as a country, a member of the community of democracies, a world community of democracies, as well as its leading power for good, bad, indifferent, and everything in between, in that relationship with our firmest and longest standing alliances, specifically the Transatlantic Alliance and our alliance with the European Union, the EU. So let's get started, and thanks again for joining me today for the solo spot. Now, to begin, in the span of just a few weeks this winter, right, 3 gatherings revealed something very profound about the changing architecture of international order. First, the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, January 20 through 24, 2026. Second, immediately following, the Munich Security Conference, February 14th through the 16th of 2026. And third, most recently, the European Union, or EU, Security and Defense Forum in Brussels, March 4th through 6th, 2026. Now, why these conferences in sequence? On the surfaces, the meetings look very routine. Economic elites in Davos, security leaders in Munich, and institutional planners in Brussels. The familiar choreography of the global policy class. But when you place them side by side, a deeper pattern starts to appear. Davos revealed this year economic realism. Munich exposed strategic anxiety. And Brussels signaled the beginnings of what I'll call an institutional response. Now, taken together, all 3 reveal a quiet but important shift, a very important shift now underway inside Europe. Europe is beginning to de-risk the transatlantic relationship. That doesn't mean abandoning it. It doesn't mean replacing it, but it does mean de-risking it. And that distinction really, really matters. Let's start in Davos. The 2026 World Economic Forum was officially about economic fragmentation. Panels focused on supply chains, semiconductors, artificial intelligence, energy transition. But beneath all those conversations was a much deeper theme: the return of geoeconomics as statecraft. Supply chains are no longer designed only for efficiency. They're now designed for resilience and leverage. Industrial policy has returned. Strategic sectors, things like semiconductors, critical minerals, rare earths, are now treated as instruments of national power. That phrase that dominated Davos was, again, de-risking. De-risking from China, de-risking from fragile supply chains, a de-risking from geopolitical shocks, but beneath the official conversation was something unspoken. Well, it was spoken, but it was really in quiet corners of the communion of the conference. Europe is not only de-risking from Beijing, it's also beginning to quietly de-risk from Washington. Now, that's not because American power is dwindling. Quite the contrary. It's because American predictability is no longer assumed, or can no longer be assumed. That realization surfaced far more clearly a few weeks later. The Munich Security Conference has long served as the emotional barometer of the Transatlantic Alliance. If Davos measures economic sentiment, Munich measures strategic mood. And the mood in February was unmistakably different than in the past years. European leaders did not question NATO. They didn't question American military power. What they did question was something more subtle: American reliability across political cycles. Now, for 75 years, the United States has been the stabilizing center of the Western security system. American power has always mattered, but just as important was American consistency. Alliances run on predictability. Predictability is the oxygen of alliances. But in Munich this year, a new question circulated quietly in diplomatic corridors. Not whether the United States remains powerful, but whether American domestic politics now introduces periodic strategic volatility. In other words, can Europe assume continuity in American policy, and frankly, in American leadership? Or must it now plan for multiple possible Americas? Now, that question is new, and it changes how Europe thinks about its own capabilities and capacities. This is where the European Union Security and Defense Forum in Brussels comes in. Now, if Munich is where anxiety surfaces, Brussels is where institutions begin to adapt or readapt. And what is emerging in Brussels is a concept European officials increasingly describe as, again, strategic de-risking. That's not decoupling. It's not anti-Americanism, but the gradual reduction of strategic overdependence in critical domains. Now, let me make that a little bit more concrete. Now, what does de-risking mean? First, let's look at defense industrial sovereignty. The Ukraine war revealed very uncomfortable realities. European militaries depend heavily on American logistics, intelligence, and munitions supply. That dependence was manageable when American policy appeared permanently stable. But if American politics may become more and more volatile, more and more ambiguous, Europe must develop deeper indigenous capacity. That will mean expanded ammunition production, integrated European air defense systems, drone and counter-drone manufacturing, joint procurement frameworks. And if the United States hesitates in a future crisis, Europe must not stall, hence the de-risking strategies. Second, let's look at the energy security sectors. The Ukraine war, again as an example, forced Europe to rethink dependence on Russian energy. Diversification worked, but the deeper lesson was about resilience. Energy security now means strategic reserves, infrastructure protection, and grid integration capable of surviving geopolitical shocks. Third, technology sovereignty. Europe has long been a regulatory superpower, but regulation alone, that does not generate strategic leverage. Europe must become an industrial technology power. That means real investment in semiconductors, artificial intelligence, and cyber defense infrastructure. Rules shape markets, but industry, that shapes power. Fourth, let's look at political legitimacy. Now, European democracies must remain resilient in an era of disinformation, polarization, and populism, because adversaries exploit alliance seams. When legitimacy erodes domestically, alliances weaken internationally. But here lies the balancing act. Europe must de-risk without alienating. If de-risking becomes decoupling, deterrence for all will weaken. If Europe builds sovereignty in ways that undermine NATO cohesion, Russia will be the beneficiary. So, the strategic path forward is a dual-track strategy. Strengthen NATO militarily, strengthen EU sovereignty industrially. These are not contradictory objectives. They are and must be and become complementary ones. And they reflect a deeper evolution in alliance politics. The transatlantic relationship must evolve from dependency to reciprocity. because reciprocity is more stable than reliance. But there's the deeper story unfolding beneath all of this. The emerging global order will not be decided only by great powers. It will be shaped by middle powers. Now, for decades, strategic debates focused on the rivalry between dominant powers and rising challengers, the United States, China, Russia. But in today's networked global economy, the decisive actors may in fact lie in between. Countries like France, Japan, South Korea, Canada, Australia, India. These states possess advanced industrial economies, technological capacity, and diplomatic networks. Now, individually, they cannot dominate the system, but collectively, they can shape the environment in which great powers must compete. And that is exactly what we are beginning to see. France, as an example, is exploring the extension of its nuclear deterrent to cover European allies. Canada is building new defense industrial partnerships to anchor allied supply chains. Japan and South Korea are beginning to invest heavily in advanced military capabilities. And India is pursuing strategic autonomy while expanding diplomatic reach across the global south. These are not the actions of passive actors. They are the early signals of a middle power strategic awakening. The power of middle states comes from their position inside those global networks. Many of the most critical nodes in modern power structures are controlled not by the great powers themselves, but by middle power economies. Semiconductor fabrication in Taiwan and South Korea, advanced lithography in the Netherlands, critical minerals in Canada and Australia, rare earth processing in Japan. These nodes form the strategic middle of the global system. Control the nodes, and you control the system. And as global supply chains become instruments of power, middle states, well, they gain leverage. The question now then is whether they can coordinate their strategies before great power rivalry forces them to choose sides. There's an historical echo here that we really need to revisit. To understand the stakes, it helps to remember that Munich itself carries deep, emotive historical meaning. Munich 1938, it was not simply a diplomatic failure. It was a moment of misrecognition. European leaders believed they were preserving peace through compromise. They failed to recognize that the philosophical foundations of the international order had already shifted. National identity had hardened. Institutional trust had weakened. And civilizational language was replacing constitutional language. Now, after 1945, the Transatlantic order was designed precisely to prevent such collapse. The United Nations, NATO, the Bretton Woods institutions. This architecture rested on three pillars: American material power, institutional frameworks, and I would say most importantly, a universalist proposition that legitimacy derived from shared rules, not shared ethnicity. For 75 years, that system moderated competition. But today, we are living in a different environment, the compound security environment, or rather the compound insecurity environment. Economic competition intersects with technological competition. Climate disruption intersects with migration. Supply chains intersect with national security. And in compound systems, shocks rarely remain isolated. They cascade across domains. Rigid blocks amplify volatility. Flexible alliances moderate it. This is why Europe's strategy of de-risking really matters. Not because the alliance is collapsing, but because alliances must evolve to remain resilient in those compound systems. The strongest alliances in history share one characteristic. Each partner retains the ability to stand alone, but chooses, let me say that again, but chooses cooperation because cooperation multiplies power. Europe's task in 2026 is not to abandon America. It is to prepare for all versions of America. An America that leads confidently, an America that occasionally turns inward, an America that remains powerful but politically polarized. Planning for all those possibilities is not betrayal, it's prudence. Because in a world of rising great power rivalry and increasingly assertive middle powers, the stability of the international system will depend less on dominance, and it will depend much more on coordination. The Transatlantic Alliance is not ending, but it is evolving. It's evolving from dependency to reciprocity, And in a compound world, reciprocity may prove the most resilient form of partnership yet. Thanks for joining me on this Civic Brief solo, and I'll see you next time with The Wise Way. Thanks again for Nation Not Self. Cheers.
Thanks for tuning into the Civic Brief. Got questions, insights, or ideas? Join us at thecivicbrief.com to continue the dialogue. Subscribe, share, and be part of shaping the future, one brief at a time.